So let's talk about CloudWatch metrics. And metrics is one of the most important topics discussed at the exam. The questions I think are pretty easy if you know CloudWatch once, so this is what we're going to do. CloudWatch is basically providing metrics for every, and with quote, maybe there's one or two services that don't have metrics, but I think they all have services in AWS, and so all the metrics basically end up in CloudWatch. So the metric is going to be a variable to monitor. So depending on the service, it's going to be obviously meaning something different. But if you take, for example, an EC2 instance, it could be CPU utilization or network in, that kind of stuff. Metrics are grouped by namespaces, and a dimension in a metric is going to be an attribute of that metric. So you may have the CPU utilization metric, but a dimension of it may be the instance ID, for example, because we have many CPU utilization of our instances. Now we can have up to 10 dimensions per metric, so we have quite a few playground to do slice and dice, and metrics will have timestamps. So each metric, when you send it to CloudWatch or when it is sent to CloudWatch automatically, it will have a time spent of when things happened. And out of all these metrics, we can do CloudWatch dashboards, and that's really cool because we get a visual aspect of how things work in our environment. Now for EC2, there is this option you need to know about. It's called detailed monitoring. So by default, your EC2 instances metrics will have metrics every 5 minutes. And so that means that if the AWS exam asks you, hey, we want to get the EC2 instances metric every 1 minute, well, the answer is enable detailed monitoring, right? So for an extra cost, you can get data every 1 minute by enabling detailed monitoring. And so using this, you're basically going to be able to prompt, more scalely prompt, your ASG. So that means that you're able to react to CPU changes, for example, way quicker. Now the feature allows us to have 10 detail monitoring metrics, so we'll be able to play a little bit with it. Just a side note, the EC2 RAM or memory usage is by default not pushed, and that's just how AWS works. And so if you wanted to push that RAM usage as a metric, you must be pushing it from the instance as a custom metric. Talking about custom metrics, it is possible to define and send your own custom metrics in AWS, and they can be whatever you want. So we have the ability to use dimensions and attributes to segment these metrics. So instance ID, environment name, you're free to name them again. We have 10 different dimensions for these metrics. And so for the resolution, this is where it gets super interesting. By default, if you have a custom metric, the standard resolution is 1 minute. But if you get a question in the exam saying, hey, how about we want to get data every 10 seconds? Well, the answer is you need to enable high resolution custom metrics. And so you can go up to 1 second. So that means you can get every second you can push a custom metric. And obviously this is going to be a higher cost because you push more data, but you can enable high resolution and get very fine grained metrics. Now a bit more advanced, but it's nice to know. The API call parameter to enable high resolution is called storage resolution. And you can go all the way down to 1 second. Now to send a metric to CloudWatch, you need to use something called put metric data. That's the API call, and you should just know about it as well. And then you should use exponential backoff in case of throttle error. So if you send too many metrics to CloudWatch and it tells you, oh, hold on, you're sending it too fast, you need to use the exponential backoff strategy, but we've seen what that means in one of the previous lectures. So let's go ahead and learn about metrics in a hands-on. So let's go to CloudWatch. And within CloudWatch, we get to the interface and we can see on the left-hand side that we have a lot of options. We have dashboards, alarms, events, logs, and metrics. So we have more lectures obviously to do, but the first one we're going to go to is metric. And so in metric, this is where we are literally able to look at anything. And so we have about 801 metrics right now available. And you can see that the metrics are grouped by categories. So we have application ELB, code build, EBS, EC2, ELB, Elastic Cache, Elastic Beanstalk, etc. All these things. So we're able to basically drill down into anything we wanted. If we looked at EC2 and we looked, say, by autoscaling group, and we can look at whatever autoscaling group we want. So let's say we want to get the CPU utilization of this autoscaling group. Then here we go. We get a little graph of the CPU utilization of this scaling group. Now we can name that graph, obviously. We can drill down by hours. So we can say, I want 1 hour, 3 hours of data, 12 hours of data. You can go up to 3 days or even 1 week, right? And so we can see that when we started our autoscaling group, that was through Elastic Beanstalk. then it was a bit of a higher CPU, maybe 10%. And then this one and this one must be deployment. So anytime we redeploy our application, I'm pretty sure the CPU skyrockets. But then the CPU just stay down for a little while. So if we go back to 1 day, we can see the CPU is really low at 0.5%. You're able to display data as line or stack area or a number if you wanted to see. So you get lots of different ways. And then once you name your graph, you're able to basically share it or add it to a dashboard. So you could create a new dashboard, say my sample dashboard. And then we'll say, okay, it's a line, and we'll add this one to the dashboard. So let's press yes, and click on add to dashboard. And now our metric is basically displaying on this dashboard. So it's really nice because now we can add more widgets. Here we save the dashboard. We can add more widgets and more metrics, and we're able to really, create something very nice. So I won't linger too long on these metrics. You can play around. I mean, you have so many metrics to look at. And I don't think you're expected to know all these metrics, but the basic EC2 ones you should know about, the basic EBS. Maybe you can look at code build. So what is it for code build, for example? We can see how many builds we've had, the duration, the failed build and succeeded build. And by projects, we can also look at by project, how many times it succeeded, the duration, the failed build, and the build. So it's really, really able to give you a lot of information about what goes on in your infrastructure when you think about it, right? You could always go into the metrics, look at the graph options, you get a lot of different customization. So once we have this, one thing I really want to show you though is going to be the detailed monitoring. So if we go to EC2, Management Console, and then we click on Auto Scaling Groups. Here are our 2 auto scaling groups. So, and they're created through the Beanstalk that we had from before. And so if we look at it, they have a launch configuration. And if we go to monitoring, we can see that we can enable group metric collection. So it's possible to enable group metric collection for that whole auto scaling group, because by default, the group metric collection is not enabled. And so you would have to click on it to get all these CloudWatch metrics populated. So you can click on this, and now it will take some time to appear after enablement. Now, if you go back to instances and click on this instance, for example, now we get transported to the EC2 instance area, and we can also click on monitoring here, and we get an information around all the metrics for that EC2 instance. And so we could select the average or whatever we want in statistics. The time range is able to be selected using whatever. So last hour, last 3 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, etc. And then the period, as you can see, by default, the period is going to be 5 minutes. That's the minimum we can get because we have basic monitoring on for this EC2 instance. And so if we wanted to have detailed monitoring, as you can see here, it says CloudWatch Metrics basic monitoring is on, but if we wanted to enable, we can click on enable detailed monitoring. And now we get the metrics at a 1 minute frequency. And so this will have more charges, but I think it's still within the free tier. So we can, yes, enable. And now we have detailed monitoring enabled. So let's refresh this page. Let's just refresh this whole page. And now we go to monitoring, and it says the CloudWatch metrics is detailed monitoring. So we're going to retrieve metrics every 1 minute. And so we can always go back and click here to disable detailed monitoring, but I'll just leave it like this for now. So the idea is that, with detailed monitoring, we're able to have a period now of 1 minute, and that's could be much better based on what we want to do. And then finally, if you were to push a custom metric, obviously it would appear in a namespace that you put right here. So there would be a new namespace, and you would just put your custom metrics there. So I hope that was helpful, and I will see you in the next lecture.